Well, not wishing to alarm, but there is a warning that World War III will erupt in just a few years unless the US financial system loosens up on China. Who's telling us that? Billionaire investor George Soros, that's who. He says America needs to let Beijing join the global currency basket or the consequences could prove catastrophic.
If there is conflict between China and a military ally of the United States, like Japan, then it is not an exaggeration to say that we are on the threshold of a third world war.
To avoid disaster, he goes on to say, Washington should strengthen its economic ties with Beijing, and it's not the only fly in the ointment either. China's clearly irked by the US building up its military presence in the region right now. On Thursday, Beijing issued 8 warnings over American spy planes swooping over the South China Sea. Regular military drills on China's doorstep and a strategic shift of US bases to the Asia-Pacific aren't exactly helping to ease tensions there either. In fact, if you look at this map, you'll see the number of US military facilities in Beijing's back.
Sounds of a so-called ceasefire. A separatist clash with government forces in eastern Ukraine. Heavy artillery fire was reported near the city of Donetsk on Wednesday in what observers call some of the worst fighting since the shaky ceasefire was declared back in February. An activist from a group supporting the separatists describes the scene.
10 minutes ago, the Ukrainian side opened fire, and now rebels are engaging in return fire against the Ukrainian side. Over there, 100 meters ahead of us, there are frontline positions, and the guys are engaging in machine gun contact with the enemy.
A spokesman for pro-Russian rebels blames provocations by Ukrainian forces for the clashes. But Ukrainian military officials say 200 rebels attacked first.
The enemy started massive shelling of our positions in the area of Marinka and Krasnogorovka from heavy weaponry. Tanks, mortars, artillery were used. The enemy is trying to move forward.
Ukrainian officials say they turned back the rebel attack and deny reports that 25 of their soldiers were wounded in the fighting. This comes on the heels of a Reuters report showing Russia's army massing troops, tanks and other weaponry near the border with Ukraine. Officials in Kiev claim Russia is preparing for a new offensive. Russia isn't commenting on its troop movements and continues to deny its military is involved in the conflict. While both sides point fingers, fighting is heating up again, and it appears the fragile ceasefire is closer than ever to collapse. Robin Kerno, CNN.
Вот такие дела. Так, ну ничего это. Сейчас перезаряжусь и вперед.
Все, принял. Сейчас убивается.
Сама!
Пацаны, опыт у кого есть? Левое плечо, блядь. Все равно он есть.
Massive Russian military vehicles on the move, part of a surprise military drill ordered by Vladimir Putin. Tactical live fire exercises involving 12,000 Russian soldiers and up to 250 aircraft in an intimidating show of force. Meanwhile, American and European forces begin scheduled drills in the Arctic Circle involving over 4,000 personnel and around 100 fighter jets. The goal is to ramp up military readiness. But with 2 competing military exercises, there are echoes of a frightening time.
It has an eerie feeling of the challenge and testing and sort of the muscle flexing of the Cold War days.
Putin is testing NATO and the U.S., analysts say, to see if they're ready for confrontation. He's held several snap exercises in recent months on a massive scale. Some have included more than 80,000 Russian troops. He routinely has his military planes fly with their transponders off near European shores, playing high-altitude, high-stakes chicken. And Sweden searched its waters for an unidentified signal that some thought was a Russian sub.
The potential for something to go wrong is exacerbated when you have lots of armed people with their fingers on the trigger moving around.
It comes on the heels of tensions over Ukraine, where Russia is accused of sending soldiers and weapons to help rebel fighters. Meeting with the head of the NATO alliance, President Obama expresses concern about what he called
the increasingly aggressive posture that Russia has taken.
A NATO official tells CNN the alliance is concerned by the size, scale, and frequency of Russia's snap exercises. But is NATO ready?
NATO has been increasingly ill-prepared to think about Russia as a threat because it just hasn't done defense planning against Russia. And yet that's what's been playing out in the Russian military over the past several years. These major exercises were meant to begin to demonstrate the possibility of conflict in Europe. Well, that's just not something that was even imaginable among NATO's military leaders.
Despite reports of heavy fighting in Luhansk, Donetsk, and the southeastern city of Novoazovsk, Russia continues to deny that it sent any forces into Ukraine. In fact, a senior international correspondent, Matthew Chance, tells us Moscow has upped its rhetoric against Ukraine and the West.
The pressure on Russia is really now being ratcheted up. The latest allegation coming from a British official telling CNN that between 4,000 and 5,000 Russian troops have been deployed into Ukraine and are currently engaged in fighting around the rebel stronghold cities of Luhansk and Donetsk. The source telling CNN that it's clear that Russia has launched large-scale incursions into Ukraine. That figure of 4,000 or 5,000 is unverified and is significantly different to the figure of 1,000 Russian troops that had been indicated as being inside Ukraine, according to the United States. President Obama saying it was that figure. All of these figures, though, have been categorically denied by the Russians. The Kremlin saying that it's purely conjecture that there are any reports at all of Russian forces in combat operations inside Ukraine. Take a listen to the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov.
It's not the first time allegations have been made. From the very beginning of the crisis, we have been blamed for everything. So it's not the first time that we hear all sorts of conjecture, and not once have any facts been presented to us. There have been reports that there are photographs from space showing movements of Russian troops. But as it turned out, it was computer games and the images were taken from there. And the latest allegations are more or less of the same kind.
Well, the rhetoric on the Russian side also being ratcheted up, with Vladimir Putin comparing the fighting in eastern Ukraine to the siege of Leningrad, St. Petersburg, of course, his hometown, by the Nazis in the Second World War. He also delivered this stark warning against any kind of military response to what's taking place by the West in Ukraine, saying this: "I hope everyone understands that it's better not to mess with Russia. I have to remind you that Russia is a nuclear superpower." So a very stark, as I say, warning there from the Russian president against any kind of Western military action in support of Ukraine. Matthew Chance, CNN Moscow.
In order to face any possible threat.
The drill also dealt with the intrusion of 2 foreign Navy vessels to the maneuver area near the Strait of Hormuz. Navy aircraft issued warning signals leading the warships, one of them American, out of the range of Iranian missiles.
Collection warship. This is Iranian naval aircraft in normal control vision. You are entering Mohammed Rasulullah naval exercise zone. Please leave this training area. Over.
Accurate targeting of floating objects by Maverick rockets on F-4 fighters, as well as the successful launch of modified Sukhoi 24 rockets towards targets at sea, were among the operations that were successfully wrapped up by Iran's army. Commander of the Iranian Navy told Press TV that by holding the drill, Iran does not see any potential threat.
The final goal is to warn extra-regional countries that with the Iranian Navy present, there is no need for foreign intervention to maintain peace and security in this region.
نیروها و به ویژه در نیروی دریایی در عرصه دریاها.
The Iranian army, which already carries out the experience of an 8-year war with Iraq from 1980 to 1988, holds annual military exercises with the aim of upgrading its defense potentials. This is the first time that the Iranian army is holding such a wide-scale military drill. It is an exclusive opportunity for the army's air, ground, and naval forces to practice the application of homemade weapons, in addition to weapons that have been modified by Iranian experts in a completely simulated war. Amir Mehdi Kazemi, Press TV, the port city of Josk at the coast of the Oman Sea.
Claims. Thank God this bombing has had positive effects. It has united us more, he says. As you can see, there are not hundreds, but thousands of people who came from all over the country. But ISIS's emergence in Saudi Arabia also seems to show the group is expanding its footprint in the entire Middle East. ISIS is not only increasing its attacks here in the east of Saudi Arabia, it also now has made gains in Libya. That's on top of the territory that the group holds in Yemen and, of course, the big swath of land in Syria as well as in Iraq. As Iraqi security forces attempt to oust ISIS from Anbar province, the group's fighters managed to capture the strategic town of Palmyra in Syria, with its stunning ancient ruins now at risk of destruction. While the Pentagon says the U.S.-led air campaign is having devastating effects on ISIS, some experts have their doubts.
It has lost ground in Iraq, but it's also gained ground. It's had to change its tactics. I think militarily, overall, it's probably weaker, but that doesn't change the fact that it has momentum. As long as it can keep up the perception of momentum, it will continue to garner support around the world.
While Saudi Arabia's leadership has vowed to help destroy ISIS, attacks like the ones in the past week threaten to destabilize the kingdom, like they have other places in the Middle East where the terror group has gained a foothold. Fred Pleitgen, CNN, London.